a libertarian because I see certain limitations in the anarchistic model. It sounds good on paper, and again, I'm open-minded to it. So I want to present a scenario which I do not think is unrealistic at all. And I would like the anarchists in my audience to let me know how they would deal with this situation, what the anarchistic response is. Because as I see it, if you build this great society where everybody voluntarily exchanges and there's no rulers and everything's great, and then you get conquered, then what's the point? What's the point of having all this freedom if it's only temporary because you get conquered by your neighbor? So let me get into what I'm talking about. In this scenario, there's going to be two cities, two countries, whatever. I'm going to call them Voluntaria and Totalitown. So Voluntaria is an anarcho-capitalist society, while Totalitown is a monarchy. Now, saying it's a monarchy, you can replace monarchy with any totalitarian form of government. I just want to create some simple parallels. So in Voluntaria, they practice the non-aggression principle, which means they don't initiate force ever. They only defend themselves. So this means that in Voluntaria, they have a very small professional private military. Now, based on the percentage of the population serving in the military in the United States, which also has a professional military, I estimate that this small professional military in Voluntaria would consist of about 0.5% of the population, and would mostly serve as law enforcement officers. So you would have the small professional military also serving as law enforcement. They would be one in the same body. There would also be a citizen militia, but there wouldn't be any coercion. Everyone would simply be free to own their own firearms and, defend their own private property. And there would be no taxation, only voluntary organizations like corporations. So instead of paying taxes to a government, you would pay certain companies or private organizations for the goods and services that you desire. So sounds good in theory, great. So in Totalitown, again, they have a monarchy. Now I'm basing these numbers on China. So I'm just using this as an example of a statist government, essentially. I'm not trying to make any insults or digs at China, I'm just using their numbers in this example. So in China, they have a small professional military consisting of 0.84% of the population and a separate law enforcement department which consists of 0.12% of the population. They also have compulsory military service required of all men, and they have to serve up to 2 years. And the income tax rate goes from about 3 to 45% depending on income. More about that in a moment. So to judge the size of the military, let's say both Voluntaria and Totalitown have 10 million people. Now, based on the numbers I gave previously, the percentages, you're going to have 500,000 professional soldiers/police in Voluntaria, and 840,000 professional soldiers and 120,000 police in Totalitown, totaling 960,000 soldiers total, outnumbering Voluntaria by 1.92 to 1. Meanwhile, you also have the citizen militia. Because Voluntaria believes in the non-aggression principle, there's no coercive draft. There is no obligation to the military or to anything. So without a coercive draft, they may put out a call that citizens of Voluntaria need to take up arms and defend themselves, but you're going to have a percentage of the population which are pacifists or cowards, and they will simply not show up. And because Voluntaria believes in non-aggression, they're not going to force them to serve in the military, so they're simply going to be short. And also, this volunteer militia is not going to have the kinds of equipment you would find in a professional army. Meanwhile, in Totalitown, not only do you have the 960,000 soldiers, you're also going to have about 5 million men in the compulsory militia, because this is required by law under punishment. All eligible males must serve for 2 years, which gives them professional training as opposed to the militia. If you live in a free society that just simply allows you to have a gun, that leaves it up to you to train yourself in its use, fine. But you're not going to be schooled in advanced soldier tactics and stuff. However, in Totalitown, because all the men were required to serve 2 years in the army, they have at least 2 years of army training, which means they can do advanced tactics that a simple militia with their own firearms simply isn't going to be able to compete with. And also, because this is compulsory and not volunteer-based, they're going to get a better turnout. The people who would be normally pacifists or cowards are going to show up out of fear of punishment from the government. So let's say they get 5 million as opposed to 2.5 million in Voluntaria. They're going to outnumber the Voluntaria militia by 2 to 1. Now, these numbers are fairly arbitrary. I don't really have any numbers showing how much of the population of a given size is going to be pacifists and cowards. I'm just using this as an example of if you have a system where the call goes out to take up arms in defense of your country, but there's no consequences for not showing up or fleeing or whatever, there's going to be a certain amount of people that aren't going to show up. You know, it's kind of like prisoner's dilemma. It's in their best interest to show up as a group, but individually, they would be better off not showing up because they risk death by going to war. And since there's no consequence for them not showing up because of the non-aggression principle, they're not going to show up. So I'm not saying they all wouldn't show up, I'm just saying about 50% of them wouldn't show up, as opposed to the 5 million representing the men in Totalitown. Now, obviously, these numbers are rounded. Not every single man would show up. Some would not be fit enough for military service. But I find it hard to believe that the numbers would be equal between these two societies, because one obligates military service and one is completely voluntary. So maybe the 2-to-1 is a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think it is, not by much. So now let's talk about military spending in these two societies. Now, in Voluntaria, they use a private military. Now, using numbers from Blackwater, which is a private defense contracting firm, which you may have heard of during the Iraq War, they cost about $500 to $700 per day per soldier, which sounds like a lot, but you have to break it out into hours. So if you work a 16-hour day, that only works out to $31.25 an hour. If you work 24 hours a day, that's $20.83 an hour. So $500 a day sounds like a lot, but you got to understand that you're risking your life and you're only getting paid, $20 to $31 an hour. That's not that much. Also, because this is a private corporation, there are limited corporate benefits. In this article that I'll link to, it talks about how these Blackwater mercenaries had astronomical insurance costs and were not eligible for life insurance at all because of their profession. So these are costs that the average soldier takes for granted. But let's break that out. So if you have 500,000 professional soldiers at $500 a day, that works out to $250 million per day spread out across 10 million citizens, which works out to $25 per day per citizen. Which, if you multiply that by the number of days in a year, per year, that's $9,125 per year of a $50,000 median income, which is based on the US. So this means that the military quote-unquote tax is 18.25%. This is what the people of Voluntaria would pay to their private mercenaries in order to defend them. And this is just the professional military. This doesn't include the militia. The militia would, I assume, bring their own supplies. So they would be free, essentially. But the professional military would still cost every citizen 18.25% of the median income anyway. Now in Totalitown, again looking at the Chinese numbers, China spends 2.1% of its GDP on the military. Government spending represents 13.6% of GDP. Thus, if we look at the military spending versus government spending, we can conclude that 15.44% of government spending is military-based. Now, the median income in China is $10,000 per year once you convert it to American dollars. This means that they are taxed at the 25% income tax bracket, which means $2,500 per year in gross taxes. Using our 15.44% figure, we can conclude that $386 per year from someone making $10,000 of the Chinese median income goes to the military, or 3.86% is the military tax. Now, this is obviously a progressive income tax, which means people at the top are paying a little bit more, people at the bottom are paying a little bit less. So I just wanted to make this point that even if these costs are the same in both societies, the average person is going to be paying less because the rich are paying more. I'm just demonstrating the differences between a system of government using a progressive income tax, which is spread out across the entire population, versus a volunteer-based private military system. I'm not really sure how that would be worked out. Maybe it would also include some sort of progressive income tax. I don't know. But I just want to compare and contrast these two systems. Here's the bottom line. Totalitown has twice the military, probably at about the same price or less, especially to the average citizen. Now, given that Totalitown has twice the military, and they don't believe in the non-aggression principle like Voluntaria does, will not Totalitown be able to easily invade Voluntaria at will? Since Voluntaria does not believe in aggression, they will not attack first. So, how can freedom be maintained? That this is the anarchist challenge. Again, I'm open minded to the idea of a volunteer based, governmentless society, but I have a hard time understanding how such a society can defend itself. But you imagine you have a neighboring country that has a totalitarian government, and it decides to invade you. And because it forces its citizens to enlist in the military, and it taxes them in order to fund that military, they're going to have a larger and better funded military than you. And yeah, you could say like, well, we're fighting for freedom and our cause is just and morale is going to be higher. Sure, morale is going to be great. Wars aren't won on morale. They're won by the number of soldiers you have and how they're equipped. So this is my challenge to any anarcho-capitalists or whatever out there who are interested in answering this question. I legitimately want to know the answer to this. What is the solution to this problem? How does an anarchistic or volunteer-based, non-aggressive country defend itself without coercive taxation and without a coercive draft? And I'd like to hear your thoughts. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.